thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to be able to address the Tennessee Human Rights Commission. As you said, Dan and I are both commissioners on the Metro Human Relations Commission. So from commissioner to commissioners, hello. We are invited here today because of a report that we were asked to write as part of Nashville's Looking Forward, Nashville's Metro planning process, which is a formal process called Nashville Next that is looking to chart Nashville's growth over the next 25 years. And it's an initiative of the Nashville Metro Planning Department. So we all know that Nashville's present is booming, but Metro is also planning for its future through this Nashville Next process. And they are planning for the future around 4 pillars. The 4 pillars are looking at economic development, looking at the environment and securing the environment, looking at the executive branch of Metro government and what Metro is doing for itself as a city, and then finally, where Dan and I come in, looking at equity and inclusion as central values of Nashville's planning process going forward. And so Metro invited Nashville for All of Us, a community coalition, to come and represent equity and inclusion as part of this planning process. So why equity and inclusion as one of the 4 pillars of this planning process? Well, as you've heard today, Nashville is already starting from a very diverse place. Nashville has already an over 11% foreign-born population, 146 countries represented in Metro school students with 117 languages. 12% of Nashville's growth can be attributed to refugee resettlement. And as you know, we have the largest Kurdish population in North America. But one of the significant changes that's coming to Nashville is an anticipated explosion of diversity over the next 25 years. And that includes Nashville and Middle Tennessee growing by more than 1 million people. And as Nashville grows in its numbers, also growing in its diversity. By 2040, 25 years from the conclusion of this planning process, Nashville will have no ethnic majority. And so the city decided to make this a central part of its planning process. We took being invited to write this report as evidence of 2 things. First, that equity and inclusion are central to a community's prosperity. And this mirrors one of Richard Florida's favorite sayings, which is that there are 3 T's necessary to a thriving economy. They are technology, talent, and tolerance. Talent meaning that economic benefits come from drawing talented people to a community, and tolerance meaning that talented people don't want to move somewhere where parts of the community are excluded and can't share in its prosperity. The second thing we took this as indicative of is that equity and inclusion are central to Nashville's community values, and that as Nashville thrives, the mandate to ensure that all Nashvillians have access to the benefits of its growth becomes even more compelling, that Nashville's strength as a city depends on shared prosperity and the shared participation of all Nashvillians in making decisions for its future. So Nashville for All of Us is a broad and diverse independent community coalition that works to promote a productive, just, and welcoming Nashville for all of its residents. It's a bit of a mouthful as a mandate there. And it was formed in 2008 to oppose efforts to make Nashville a less welcoming community by passing an English-only ordinance, a charter amendment that would have meant that the official language of Nashville was English, and that Nashville had to do its business in the English language. We just celebrated the 5th anniversary of that victory, so we're not looking to the past talking about this, but we are looking at Nashville for All of Us as a model for future partnerships that can advance equality in Nashville and in Tennessee generally. So what is this diverse community coalition? Well, you can imagine some of the groups that might first come to mind when you think about opposing an English-only environment. Groups like the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, or Conexión Americas, or the Coalition for Education About Immigration, or the ACLU of Tennessee. But the cool thing about Nashville for All of Us is that it brought those groups together with groups like labor unions, and the Chamber of Commerce, and the religious community, and a broad coalition of people from Nashville's private sector, the business community. And when those folks sat at the same table, and when labor unions talked to the chamber, who talked to the ACLU, who talked to a Catholic priest, who talked to a Kurdish refugee, people learned something about the strength of a diverse community. And when all of those groups came together to say that an English-only provision doesn't represent Nashville, turns out that they win. So, as part of this planning process, Nashville Next asked Nashville for All of Us to write a background report outlining a vision of best practices to bring the same kind of partnership among nonprofit community, metro government, and the private community to ensure that equity and inclusion remain central to Nashville's future. That was a tall order. And so we went to the university and we found Dan Cornfield, who is a sociologist who has spent a lot of time looking at these issues in Nashville, Nashville's immigrant community, and lots of different communities within Nashville. And we asked him to bring to the table the framework of sociology and the framework of analyzing change in things like societal group relations, basic institutions like the family and the workplace, social spaces like cities and neighborhoods in the nation, and demography, like the size and the density and the location and the composition of the population as it changes. And so I'm going to let Dan talk for a minute about how he brought those tools of sociology to thinking specifically about equity and inclusion in Nashville's future.
Thank you, Alistair. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, commissioners, for inviting us. We are honored to be here. It's a pleasure to see my many colleagues in the mayor's office, Shauna, and also my colleagues on the Metro Human Relations Commission, Deb and Tom. And the Nashville for All of Us is an unusual coalition, and as Alistair was just explaining, and Nashville, like the rest of the United States, has had its fair share and continuing fair share of human rights challenges and issues of poverty and inequality and things of the like. One of the things about Nashville as a city on this planet is that Nashville, while it may have had its fair share of social problems, also has really been part of the solution at the same time. Nashville is a rather exemplary city when it comes to trying to tackle some of the deepest social issues that do divide us and prevent us platonically from becoming the democracy that we all hope to achieve. So very briefly, I just want to add to what Alistair was saying, and that is that what I think brought us here to this point in Nashville, and for many parts of the United States and possibly the world, it was really the 1960 lunch counter sit-ins in Nashville. Really, the nonviolent approach was an important statement about how to achieve an integrated and open society. And what that movement launched was a subsequent series of accumulating social movements in Nashville. It not only trained the Freedom Riders who fanned out throughout the rest of the South to end Jim Crow, but it also inspired many others to continue Nashville's pathway on becoming an open society along a variety of social dimensions. And so soon after the civil rights movement unfolded, the women's movement unfolded in Nashville. And then after the women's movement unfolded in Nashville with the momentum of the earlier civil rights movement, the gay rights movement unfolded in Nashville. And then as the population continued to diversify, especially after about 1990 or so, the immigrant rights movement became a very strong presence in Nashville. And then all along, there's been a labor movement in Nashville that's especially strong in the public sector and in the transport sector, some parts of the building trade, some parts of manufacturing. And so there's been a wide range of very important social movements that have expressed themselves in Nashville and helped to make Nashville as exemplary a city as a city can be in dealing with some of the most trying social issues in our society. And by the time Nashville for All of Us emerged as a coalition, it's my understanding that that was really perhaps the broadest and widest and most diverse social movement to come together in Nashville to tackle a very wide range of lingering and new social issues, especially as they pertain to human rights. And our report that we are entering into the archives here for this testimony tries to show not only some of the emerging problems that do exist in Nashville, but also the many constructive steps that very enterprising activists and movements are taking right now to try to make Nashville a more humane society.
So, as Dan said, we looked at this as a model for how to move Nashville from a past that included the crossing of boundaries quite literally in the sit-in movement, and the crossing of boundaries when Nashville created its Metro Consolidated Government, to a city in which boundaries are crossed to increase diversity for all sectors of our community. We see that there are, that these roots that Nashville has reverberate in three main ways now in Nashville today. One is through advocacy. Nashville has a very strong advocacy community that promotes always values of equity and inclusion. We see that kind of advocacy in things like the defeat of the English-only amendment, the passage of Nashville's non-discrimination ordinance for Metro government, Metro's procurement non-discrimination policy that assists women and minority-owned businesses, and the strong response of the city against vandalism at the Al Farouk Mosque in February of 2010. In addition to advocacy, we see a strong promotion of awareness of issues of equity and inclusion in Nashville. Things like, just a couple of floors upstairs here, the Civil Rights Room that keeps Nashville's history at the forefront of its public spaces. And things like WNPT's Next Door Neighbor series, which went into, made very close and intimate portraits of Nashville's immigrant community in our public television space. And then, in addition to advocacy and awareness, real innovative centers of service and community engagement. Places like Casa Asafran here in Nashville, which is the gateway to Nashville's immigrant community, where now on Nolensville Road you can engage with Conexión Americas and their enterprise programs for small businesses and for homeowners and tax preparation, where you can now get pre-K education through Metro schools, where the Metro Health Department now has a clinic, where Tennessee Justice for Our Neighbors provides legal services, and other nonprofits that serve the immigrant community, like the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, now have their offices. That kind of innovative one-stop shopping of community service. Places like the Metro Public Health Department in North Nashville that addresses healthcare delivery through a holistic model that includes programs like Project Blossom, which works to reduce infant mortality, and the New Life Project, which looks at policies and systems that discourage men from helping care for their families. And things like the New Americans Advisory Committee and the My City Academy that I know you heard the mayor speak about this morning. Again, ways to bring people into service and community development, and also to connect them closely with their government. As part of this report that Dan and I put together, we wanted to take this model of crossing boundaries and bringing together the public and the private sectors into a model that could serve Nashville going forward as it meets new challenges of equity and inclusion. And so we proposed a public-private partnership of representatives drawing from many of the strengths of Nashville's community, like the arts community, clergy, grassroots leaders, academics, students, philanthropists, government leaders, business rights advocates, labor, hospitality sector, the healthcare sector, and advocates for marginalized communities, envisioning that they can come together like the people who made up Nashville for All of Us came together to find the bridges that make Nashville stronger. And drawing upon these recommendations, we've also proposed indexing Nashville's inclusivity, putting together an annual report that looks at things like the employment sector, education, law enforcement, housing, and infrastructure to see how we're doing, to always be taking our pulse of Nashville as a city to make sure that we are taking that culture of crossing boundaries, of ensuring equity and inclusion from Nashville's past to its present and well into its future. Thank you.
Would you all do the annual report, or would Nashville Next?
We haven't tasked anyone with that yet. It's something that we think could be done by a dedicated organization. It could be something that the Metro Human Relations Commission looks at, or could find a home somewhere else in Metro.
Well, what will Nashville Next do with your report?
It's one of 18 background papers that Nashville Next has used in the first stages of this planning process, and it will inform all of the policy decisions made throughout the planning process.
If I may add, there were many background reports commissioned by the Nashville Next process, and ours was the first one out of the gate. And with each, and I'm told that that was partly deliberate, suggesting it's a strong policy priority for the city. And just forgot what I was just going to say. But basically, oh yeah, with each of these background reports, there's an event with an outside speaker, and so with much fanfare, our report was released at the beginning of the Nashville Next process.